today we're in the area of Berchtesgaden and we're here to look at some of the sites and the actual places depicted in the last episode of Band of Brothers. You might remember in that episode they move into Berchtesgaden, they move up to the Eagle's Nest. Well, we're going to look at some of those actual places today, the real life places where those events really happened as depicted in that final episode of Band of Brothers. Episode 10 of Band of Brothers, the final episode of the series, points. Arguably the episode that has some of the most iconic scenes in the whole series. Well, today we're going to take a look at some of the real life locations depicted in that episode. They're not going to be in sort of chronological order entirely, but some of the real life locations as featured in that episode. Now, the next thing we see in that episode is the guys moving along a road in the centre of Berchtesgaden. And it's fairly empty and quiet and they're looking around. That's potentially quite likely because a lot of the people who would have been there would have cleared out, and maybe the people who were still there probably wouldn't have wanted to hang around in the street too much, but that would have been somewhere around here. So this is the road leading through Berchtesgaden that you might remember in the series. Eventually get to the end of that road and they run into this big hotel. Well, that hotel is just at the end of this road. That's where we're going to get to next. But this road right here leads through Berchtesgaden and is pretty much the area that was depicted in that part of the episode as they moved through here trying to capture their first objective, which was the hotel at the end of this road. Okay, so I've just come slightly further up the hill from where we were just now, and just ahead of me here is the site of the Berchtesgadener Hof Hotel. Now, unfortunately, it's not there today. This building here has replaced it, but this hotel, or the site where this hotel was the objective of Dick Winters and Easy Company as they moved through into this area of Berchtesgaden. You might remember in that episode of Band of Brothers, they're coming up the road and they say, we need a place to put the Colonel. Well, Colonel Sink, they needed a place to be able to set up his headquarters. And that was going to be right here. This was the hotel where the headquarters was set up and where the officers were going to be based. Other men would have been billeted in other homes and buildings just nearby, but this was the site of the Berchtesgadener Hof Hotel. So you might remember in that episode of Band of Brothers, they arrived there and there's the big Nazi flags hanging outside, and they go in and the guy on reception tries to like run off and hide the book and stuff. Well, that was right here. This is the place where that actually happened in real life, the site of the Berchtesgadener Hof Hotel. Now, whilst this has been redeveloped, if we just walk around the other side, which we're going to do right now, there are like a couple of little bits that still remain from the original building. So let's go take a look at those right now. So where we were stood before in that street was just down in that direction, and as you head up here, you arrive at the site where the Berchtesgadener Hof Hotel would have been, right here on the other side of this roundabout, where that modern building sits today. But you might see this wall kind of leading down to the left-hand side. Well, some of that is original. Let's go take a look. So I mentioned this wall to the left of the hotel. Well, some of this wall here, and then also some of this garage area that sits kind of just behind, sort of almost underneath the hotel. The new building is up there now, and the site of the hotel is right here. So some of this wall and some of those garages over there are original. So there are a couple of bits that you can still see, but the Berchtesgadener Hof Hotel is pretty much gone. So in that episode, they show the guys spending a little time here in the hotel. They're looting the silver and stuff that definitely did happen. And then from here, they push on to the Eagle's Nest itself. Now that is off in the distance behind me. And that is where we're going to go next. I'm very excited to follow in the footsteps of Easy Company for this part as we head up to the Eagle's Nest to carry on. Let's go. Okay, so in that episode, the next place that we see is the Eagle's Nest itself. We're going to head up there now, have a look at a couple of the famous places that were depicted in that episode. They burst into the main room kind of with their guns ready. We're going to take a look at that. The area where they find the dead German officer as well. We're going to take a look at that room. But we're going to look at the area where we kind of see the guys clambering across the rocks trying to race to get there. We're going to check that out first. Let's go. Okay, so here you can see the view across to the Eagle's Nest, and the guys were kind of depicted like sort of clambering across the rocks trying to get to it. And so, you know, look, that would have been depicting somewhere up here, and I think it's worthwhile for up here. When we look at some of the main rooms and stuff in here, in Band of Brothers, they did a really fantastic job of making it look true to life. So much so that there were people who believed that it was filmed actually in the Eagle's Nest, but it wasn't. It was on a set, but it did look very true to life, as you're going to see in some of the video. Okay, so we've just arrived into the Eagle's Nest, into the main room, and one of the first scenes that we see in that episode of Band of Brothers is the guys kind of bursting through the doors into kind of the main room, or one of the main rooms of the Eagle's Nest. Well, that was this room I'm stood in right now. That's what it was depicting. The doors are right there behind me, and they burst into this room here. They started to look around, and Spears went across and found the dead German officer. Well, in that episode, he was kind of stood roughly where I am now, and he went over to the far side, and that was depicted in that episode. And it was this room right here, where Spears and the other guys entered through the doors into the main room here. So you get to give you a better idea, this is the door that they came through in that room. Obviously, at the time they still didn't know who was up here entirely, so they still had rifles drawn and came in to explore, and this was the main room. As depicted pretty accurately. It wasn't filmed in here, by the way, but it was depicted pretty accurately. This was the main room in the Eagle's Nest. So when you come into this room, one of the bits you can see as depicted in that episode was kind of this corner of the room. So probably from this kind of angle was where Spears came in here, and then went over to find the officer over on this side of the room. And the other cool thing that was depicted in this room was, you might remember the scene with Alton Moore looking through the photo album. Well, in the series, that was depicted as happening right here in this corner of the main room. And you might remember in the series, Spears interviews him later, like demanding, "Where's the album?" And he denies all knowledge. Well, that would be where he took it from, as depicted in the series, in the corner of this room right here. So we've just come into a pretty famous part of the Eagle's Nest, and the bit, if you are familiar with Band of Brothers, you will recognise this piece, because they have the scene where the guys, the officers, are relaxing here on the sun terrace. They've been drinking, and Winters comes out to talk to them. Well, that's on the sun terrace right here behind me. This is a really cool part. It has glass on the front of it now to kind of stop us falling over the edge, but it wouldn't have had glass back then. This just would have been an open sun terrace. But this is what was depicted in the series. The guys were sat right here. They were drinking champagne and stuff, and Winters comes through right here. You remember one of the last scenes depicted in this area here is where Winters comes through and he's talking to Nixon. He says, "I've got something to show you." Well, then they head off to look at that place. Well, that is where we're going to head down to next from here. Let's go. So they leave the Eagle's Nest, which is up on the hill up there behind me. Next thing we see in that episode is Winters driving along the road with Nixon in the Jeep towards Hermann Goering's house. And you might remember he takes him to the cellar with the huge wine and alcohol collection. Well, Hermann Goering's house isn't actually there anymore, so you're going to have to use your imagination with me on this one, but nonetheless we're going to go take a look at the site because there's still a couple of things up there that we can see. So here we are at the site of Hermann Goering's house. Hermann Goering was head of the Air Force, the Luftwaffe. He lived right here on the hillside, just down from where Hitler's Berghof home was, with the Eagle's Nest up on the mountain overlooking this area. And he lived right here. Now, his house does not remain anymore. In May 1945, the Allies heavily bombed this area, trying to remove the risk of any resistance or like a final stand before they moved in here. And nothing remains of the actual house anymore. So whilst we can't look at the actual house or any remains of the house, we can see where it was. They have this sort of ornamental pond now. This sits in the grounds of the large hotel that sits up here on the hillside. And this is where Hermann Goering's house was. So you might remember in that episode, they come here and they go down into the wine cellar underneath here. So some of that used to remain underneath here and you could see it. You can't anymore, unfortunately. But you might remember in that episode of Band of Brothers where Winters and Nixon go down into the cellar, O'Keefe's guarding the door of the house, and they go down below just here, and Nixon is mesmerised by the wine collection that sits down there in the basement. But this is where Goering's house was, with this fantastic view. So that ornamental pond where we were is literally just kind of right here on the ridge of this little mound that we're in front of now. And I mentioned this area got heavily bombed. Well, there's evidence of that. You can see over here there is a huge crater remaining. It's kind of in the shadow, so hopefully you guys can see it all right. But here is a huge crater that remains from the Allied bombing that took place here in 1945. Now where we are, as I mentioned, Goering's home was just up here on this mound, so literally underneath us here in this slope would be where that wine cellar was, where Dick Winters and Nixon went down into below Goering's home. So from this location, in that episode of Band of Brothers, we actually see the guys leave the Berchtesgaden area, and they mention how sad they are to do so until they see Austria. Well, from here, they move down into an area called Zell am See. That's probably about an hour south of where we are here in Berchtesgaden. They move down there, and that is where we're going to go next, continuing in the footsteps of Easy Company and following the real locations depicted in this last episode of Band of Brothers. Okay, so we've just arrived here in a place called Zell am See. Now, you might remember in that episode, Band of Brothers, the Easy Company moved down from where they were in Berchtesgaden, and the scene shows them kind of arriving by the lake in this huge hotel where they go to kind of set up their HQ. Well, that was depicting this place right here. This behind us here is the Grand Hotel next to the lake right here. So that's where this was based. Now, actually, in terms of the accuracy of that, it's not entirely right, because Easy Company did come through here and the headquarters of the 506 was set up here, so Colonel Sink's headquarters was here, but they didn't actually stay in this area. They moved on from here to Cape Prune. Now we're going to do a little bit more about this area in my next video, so not going to talk too much around the detail of this place. That's going to be in the kind of next episode that I do. We're going to talk about Zell am See and then also Cape Prune as well. So that just about rounds us off. I hope you enjoyed this video, kind of following in the footsteps of Easy Company, and more specifically kind of following along the places that were depicted in that final episode of Band of Brothers. I have found it fascinating going from place to place doing this video for you. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Stick around, future videos, loads more to come on the channel. Thanks for watching. I'm going to see you on the next one.